All aboard! Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, football fans of all ages, I am Beast Mikey. You have now arrived at my train of thought. It's also time to ask the question once again. Where do we go from here? I'm going to start in the NFC West this time. We're batting cleanup on this series, and we're going to deal with Seattle, Los Angeles, the Rams, the Cardinals, and the team I'm going to start with, surprisingly, the Niners. Imagine being 1 yard short of the title. Imagine being 1 yard short of winning the Super Bowl. It's not in terms of scoring, it's in terms of defense, your strength on the team. All you have to do is get one stop and you're good to go. They did not get that one stop against the Chiefs. Kansas City went down the field and scored a game-winning touchdown. The Chiefs win their second straight championship. They're second over the Niners in 5 years, and it felt like that's where the 2024 season truly started for San Francisco. And one could argue that it might have been starting before this. It might have started with the injury to Dre Greenlaw in the second quarter where he tore his Achilles. Greenlaw, as we've come to find out, has become the heart and soul, or one of the hearts and souls of this team and of this defense. He brings the thunder to complement Fred Warner's lightning. Not that Warner doesn't bring thunder. And that was kind of the theme for the Niners this year, because there were injuries all over the place. Ricky Pearsall got shot before he even played a down and had to miss the first month of the season. You had the Christian McCaffrey saga, who was on the cover of Madden after winning Offensive Player of the Year, and we barely saw him in 2024. It was in the whole German situation where he had to go to Germany to deal with the injury issues. It was a awful year for CMC. Deebo Samuel had some injury issues. George Kittle, though he played 15 of the 17 games and he was excellent, he had some injury issues. Brandon Ayuk only played 7 and tore his ACL. It was just ugly. And we got to see what Brock Purdy was like when Voltron wasn't at full strength. It wasn't pretty. Now, Jawan Jennings did step up nicely, but it just wasn't pretty for Purdy when Voltron wasn't at full strength. Jordan Mason did admirably without CMC, but then he got hurt. And Isaac Urendo did admirably, and he had some injury issues. It was just a brutal sign on the offense. And on the defense even, it was also not great. Fred Warner played as well as he could, as much as he could. Aside from him, Nick Bosa missed some time. I mentioned Greenlaw, who missed half the year. And I mentioned Hufanga. I didn't even mention Hufanga yet. He had some injury issues. It was just an absolute mess from bell to bell, start to finish. The Niners were nowhere near the destructive force that they've been the last 3 years. It feels like this was the way things went right after their last Super Bowl loss to the Chiefs, where they lose to Kansas City in the 1920 season, and then the 20 seasons completely capsized because of all the injuries they had. From Nick Bosa tearing his ACL to the Raheem Mostert injuries when he was in San Francisco. It was injuries everywhere in the 20 year. And then they went all in for Trey Lance and failed and lucked out with Purdy. And it was just a rough year for San Francisco. And this was kind of the remix of it. Another rough year. So the record will tell you that. And some of the games will tell you that, because the Niners had some really puzzling losses. But statistically speaking, the numbers won't tell you that completely. Offensively, they were actually very good. They were fourth in the league in offense. They could get the ball down the field and score because they just had way too much talent not to. Passing-wise, things were, again, very good. Fourth in the league, once again. Very impressive. Even the rushing totals, not terrible. They were hovering around the top 10 in that regard. So the Niners could get busy when it came to the offense. They were efficient in this. Points-wise, again, not bad, above average. Good work. They did good jobs here. So you figure, okay, wait a minute. The Niners were pretty efficient offensively, and yet they were not good record-wise. They couldn't get the W's. Defensively, top 10 here too. They were top 10 in the yardage category. They were actually 8th in terms of total yards per game given up. They were 5th in terms of passing defense. They were mediocre in terms of the run, I would say basically average. But then the problem was the points. The whole points thing. They were 4th from the bottom. You want a reason why the Niners struggled to make the playoffs and win games? You want a reason why the Niners didn't make it, even with all the injuries and all that? You want a reason why they only went 6-11? That's it right there. They were 4th from the bottom in terms of points. That is not a Niners team you would expect. And it's the reason why Robert Saleh is back in San Francisco as a defensive coordinator. There's a reason for that, too. Saleh was not a good coach. And I think we all recognize that because though the defenses were good, the offenses were not. And because of this, he got fired from the Jets, although the Jets organization is absolute chaos. And they had to move onward, upward, and forward without him. And Saleh moved forward to the Bay. And I think he's going to fit very well there. Well, as long as the Niners are healthy. Speaking of healthy, are the Niners healthy financially speaking? When it comes to the salary cap? The answer, kinda. They have $34.3 million to spend in terms of cap. Now, that's in the bottom third of the league. And it's the 13th worst situation to be in the league, even though it's not terrible. Unfortunately, the Niners are going to have some major decisions to make. What do you do with Dre Greenlaw? What do you do with Tre'Davious Ward? What do you do with Hufanga? What do you do with Brock Purdy being the big one? They're already offering him $45 million, but that's not the going rate for most QBs right now. What do you do with San Francisco? They can't keep everyone. There's no chance of that. But who do they keep? That is a question that we need to see answered. The other question is, who do they draft? And where do they draft? They have the 11th pick in this year's draft in Green Bay, and they have plenty of compensatories to help their cause. So they have their own second, they have their own third. They have a compensatory third. They have their own fourth and two more compensatory picks there. They have their own sixth. They have New Orleans as fifth, Carolina 7, Arizona 7, and their own at 255. So the Niners got plenty of picks to go to work here and to figure some things out. Can they draft properly? Are they going to draft the quarterback, Purdy or not? These are questions that we need San Francisco to answer. And what do they do about Trent Williams? How much time does he have left in the league at all, A, and B, as an elite left tackle? It's another question that we're going to have answered. Kelvin Banks, Will Campbell, and Membu. And this is a good offensive line class. There are several left tackles that they will probably be looking at. Josh Simmons is another one. But there are several left tackles that will probably be looking at San Francisco that could possibly fill that void. We'll see what the Niners do. Can Voltron be reassembled? Only time will tell. To Arizona, and a Cardinals team that is promising and frustrating simultaneously. How do I say that? Well, it's easy. Let's look at the offense. You have a promising player at each of the skill positions that you need to have one. Kyler Murray, promising a decent QB. I don't think he's special. I don't think he's generational. I don't think he's awful. I think he's a good quarterback. Just generally good. And maybe the Cardinals will move on from him after this year, but that's a next year where do we go from here question. What he did last year was not bad by any means. He ran it efficiently well. He was part of a top-tier rushing attack with James Conner. I'll get into that in a sec. And he threw it decently well. Not up to the standards I think he needed to be. They were only 18th in passing yards per game. But they're at the very least a pretty good passing attack and a generally very good rushing attack. Marvin Harrison and Trey McBride, a really good combination of wide receiver and tight end. Marvin Harrison as a rookie, good. He didn't set the world on fire. He wasn't Malik Neighbors and he wasn't Brian Thomas, but he was a good receiver. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think in year two, he'll be better. I think in time, he'll be better. And Arizona will get it right when it comes to having a wide receiver or two on the other side of him. Trey McBride was excellent. There's no other way to say this. He broke out 1,100 plus yards. He only had 2 touchdowns, which was wild. But he was a very good tight end. And he was a very athletic one, too. He had a monster season. And James Conner was another one who had a big year. And I think that was another 1,000 yards on his end and really helped balance out the rushing attack that Kyler Murray can bring with the thunder he can bring. And obviously, Murray bringing the lightning. So Arizona was a very productive, solid offense. Good work there. It's just the defense leaves some to be desired. I would like to see some more high-end talent on that unit. I think it would feel better for the Cardinals' chances because the Cardinals overall, they're scoring-wise, They were hovering around the top 10 for most of the year. They were 12th in terms of scoring, and I already mentioned the other statistics there. So looking at their defense, Arizona, it was kind of lacking the high-end talent, though in some cases they worked out pretty well, and others they didn't. Kind of sort of average, kind of in the average category in terms of total yardage. In terms of the passing yards, they were in the higher tier. Good work there. They were the 12th best in terms of defending the pass. 13th worst in terms of defending the run, though, which at times did get them gashed, especially earlier on in the season. And the points-wise given up was all right. Arizona's not awful by any means. They're kind of in the average tier again. So best of times, worst of times, mid of times, that's kind of what Arizona is. And I can see that. I can see that with the Cardinals. That would explain why they were kind of sort of mediocre. In truth, their season really flipped with the Seattle game, the one in Seattle, where Kyler Murray was not looking good in that game, and then he threw that pick six, and it felt like the Cardinals were never the same team. They were never as potent or dynamic unless they played awful teams, or teams like the Niners at the end of the year that was just packed it in. It was just, they weren't the same. They just didn't hit the same. So how are they going to hit free agency? Will they hit free agency? They've got a lot of money to do it. The third most, as a matter of fact, in the NFL at $77.1 million in cap space. Yeah, they're paying Kyler Murray a good amount of money, but they don't really have too many other monster contracts aside from him. And the Cardinals got a lot of work to do, to me, especially on defense. I just want to see some high-end talent on that unit. Like a pass rusher would be good. Some defensive line help that would be good. Some cornerback help. Some linebacker help. I would just like to see Arizona just have some high-end talent on defense. I would feel so much better for the Cardinals in that case. And maybe a wide receiver, too, would be nice. I mean, I don't hate what Arizona has in that room, but I guess just be a little bit more dynamic, I would honestly say, is what I need to see from a Cardinals team that does have some promise. I just need to see some more of it. Marquise Wilson's not bad, but it's a major drop-off after Harrison and Trey McBride in terms of the receiving yardage. So I do need to see that get a little bit better. Can Arizona draft it, though? That's something that they have kind of sort of struggled with, but can they draft it? They picked 16th. They have their own picks in the first 5 rounds. They don't have a 6th, and they have the Jets 7th. So that's where Arizona fits in terms of the draft. Can the Cardinals keep this moving forward? Because though the Niners, I would have to think, will be back. And the other 2 teams in this division may not be going away as quietly as one would want them to. Let's go to Seattle, who has, I would say, a promising season that was. I don't think we saw Seattle coming in terms of winning 10 games. I don't think we thought that Seattle could be as good at times as they were and have a roster as kind of sort of as complete as it was. Seattle had a respectable unit and a respectable squad last year. Geno Smith, and I'll absolutely will be talking about him shortly, was kind of best of times, worst of times. There were moments in time where Geno Smith was really good, where he would help guide Seattle to a win and would get the ball smoothly to DK Metcalf, which I'll talk about, or get the ball smoothly to Jackson Smith-Njigba, who had a breakout season, a monster year, and get the ball to Tyler Lockett, who was as reliable as it gets. I did like what I saw from the tight end unit with Kobe Parkinson, and Seattle's offensive line, though at times not great. When Geno needed them at times, they worked. Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. I love this running back duo. I really do. I love the thunder that they both bring. I love the speed of Walker. I love the overall improbability of tackling Charbonnet. I love the thunder and lightning, really a lot of thunder from those 2 guys. It's a shame that they're both kind of sort of injury risks. Both guys can get hurt quite a bit. I had them both on my fantasy team. They were both nice backs when necessary. It's just wild that neither got to 600 yards. That is a surprise. But I love the thunder that they both run with, and I love the power that they both run with. I do need to see this offensive line improve, but I do love the thunder that both those guys bring. Smith-Njigba, like I mentioned before, had a monster year, 1,100 plus yards. He was cooking this past year. So what did Seattle rank? What did Seattle do with their offense? a higher tier offense. Geno Smith threw for over 4,300 yards, so it makes sense. That's why they were 8th. They were 14th in terms of their total offense per game, in terms of total offense per game yards-wise. They were, unfortunately, towards the bottom in terms of the run game, which is surprising because, like I said, I really like both those running backs. They were 5th worst in terms of rushing. As I mentioned, neither of the backs in question got to 600 yards, which was incredibly shocking. That offensive line, no bueno. The offensive line absolutely has to improve ASAP. Otherwise, I think they will be kind of sort of similar to what they were on offense. Their points per game scored, they were below average. Nothing too crazy, but kind of below average, which is, again, a little surprising considering the individual talent on the offensive side of the ball. Now, Mike McDonald did do a decent job defensively in some units. Above average when it came to total yards per game, which is good. You kind of expect that because he comes from the Ravens, and the Ravens know what they're doing. They were hovering around the top 10 in terms of the passing defense. They were 11th. Good work. I do like those young corners in Reek Woolen and Witherspoon. Although releasing Jenkins and the safety room, that could be a bit of a problem. I like Jenkins. I think he's a good safety, and I think he's going to get paid in what's becoming a pretty good safety market. And they were pretty much average in terms of stopping the run, which is another good look. That Leonard Williams and company, and Leonard Williams had that spectacular game against the Jets. They are a pretty good unit there. They kind of struggle with the linebacker unit, though, losing Jordan Brooks and letting go Tyrell Dotson. Both balled out in Miami pretty well. Like that was really a move that did not work out for them. But Seattle overall had a good defense. They were also hovering around the top 10 in points allowed. So Seattle's defense got it done there. They're actually 12th in terms of points allowed. The other thing that I think really hurt them were the red zone. There were times where Seattle's red zone offense was just maddening. And whether it was Geno Smith turnovers or their inability to get some push up front to allow Charbonnet or Kenneth Walker to pound it in the end zone, it was just, at times, just agonizing to see Seattle try to do something in the red zone. Hopefully, they could use some of the money that they have in question to help their cause and get some offensive line help, because they could definitely use that. Seattle is 5th most in the cap situation. They're way behind Arizona, $10 million behind the Cardinals, $67.3 million in terms of salary cap space, still 5th most in the league. They can use some for that offensive line. They can use some for the linebacking core. I would imagine they're going to go get receiver help because they opted to release Tyler Lockett after a long career in Seattle. I've always remembered him in Seattle. At least I will once he retires, inevitably. Lockett can still play. Don't get it confused. I think he's going to be a pretty good receiver somewhere, as long as the quarterback is decent. But yeah, it's going to be different seeing Tyler Lockett in a different uniform. As for DK Metcalf, they decided to trade him and acquiesced to his wishes of him wanting to be traded. He's going to Pittsburgh, and they got a second-round pick in return for him. That's a pretty good look, and it looks like a pretty good indication that they're going to be drafting a receiver somewhere. The real question is, but where? They now have 2 2s, 50 and 52. So Seattle could do some work there. They also had the 18th pick in the draft. I should probably mention that as well. They have their own 3 and the Lions 3. So that's good work there. So a 1, 2 2s, 2 3s. 3 of the first 92 picks. There's some business that can be done here if you're Seattle. They have their own 4th, their own 5th. Chicago's 5th. And their own 6th and their own 7th. So Seattle's got some picks and could do some work here. That's a team that drafts respectably. I just need to see them get that offensive line better. I could also see them try to get their receiving core obviously better, and I would imagine somewhat younger. Although replacing the overall physical skill of DK Metcalf is going to be really hard. They're going to have to do something at receiver to really get that part right and keep things going. And oh yeah, the elephant in the room. They traded Geno Smith to the Raiders, and now once that trade becomes truly official, Geno going to the Raiders, and they're gonna do something at quarterback, right? Where do they go for one? Is it Sam Darnold? Who is it? Aaron Rodgers? Who becomes the QB1 in Seattle? And who's he throwing the ball to? And finally, we go to the LA Rams. And we go to a Rams team that went from not caring about picks to actually being outstanding with them. Their late round draft picking over the last few years has been incredible. And now their early round draft picking is starting to become really, really good. They decided, we're going to absolutely slaughter cats with the two Seminoles in Brandon Fisk and especially Jared Verse, who was their first round pick since Jared Goff. Wild to think, but true to think. Verse absolutely slaughtered cats, and he was the easy pick for defensive rookie of the year. He was tremendous. A lot of the young players are, whether it's Kobe Turner or Durant, like their secondary can get better, but their young defense is very productive, and I like where they could be. They're not perfect. They could still use that one high-end guy, but they are not a bad unit at all on the defensive side. They were, I would say, in terms of points, slightly below average. I'm kind of going backwards from what I've been normally doing, but the Rams are kind of below average in terms of the points. So, okay, fine. That's all right. They scored plenty. I'll get to the offense in a sec. It's where really their bread was buttered. Sean McVay can get busy on that realm. They were hovering around the bottom 10, unfortunately, for their end in terms of the rushing game. And pass defense, also kind of sort of hovering around the bottom 10. I would say maybe even below average is probably to be a little more fair to Los Angeles about in terms of pass defense. Now, total defense, the Rams were also not great. They weren't great in terms of that. I like their young guys. Again, it's just as a unit, things just didn't click completely. They were actually, looks like 7th worst in terms of the total defense, which was unfortunate because I do like some of their dudes. They just have to, I guess, gel a little bit more and kind of learn the game a little bit better, at least the pro style things. I think they're going to be fine, though. I think the Rams defense will get better as they continue to draft as well as they do, because the Rams drafting has been ridiculous. Exception for the offensive line and maybe the cornerbacks, but aside from that, the Rams drafting ability and acumen has been absolutely ridiculous. So, looking at the offense, and there's a lot to like about the offense. It's amazing that yards-wise, they're only above average, which is just, that's a little surprising to me. I kind of expected that more from Stafford and Nakua and Cooper Kupp and Kyren Williams. And I know Kupp and Nakua and Higbee had some injury issues, but I am a little surprised that it's not higher. And yes, Stafford did miss a couple games as well with injuries because that offensive line they have was not great. So that disappoints me. But it's a little surprising to see that. With the passing game, they were top 10, though. So at least there's that. So you already know that they were 10th in terms of passing. So rushing-wise, you already know it's going to be a little bit further down. And it was towards the bottom, which is kind of sad that the Rams' rushing attack with Kyren Williams was bottom 10. They were the 9th worst, which is really surprising because it looks like every time you looked up on red zone or something, Kyren Williams is probably in the end zone. It's just a little alarming with the yards that the Rams were where they were in all these realms, and yet the Rams still made the playoffs and still made things happen. It's just a little surprising to see that. Points-wise, even, they were towards the bottom. They were below average in terms of points. So even there, the Rams' numbers didn't tell the whole story. They had to grind some games out, and they were able to do it, but it's just a little surprising that the numbers were where they were. Speaking of numbers, where are the numbers in terms of the Rams and their cap space? Let's look at them. They have $32.6 million in cap. So right behind the Niners. So that puts them 12th worst in the league in terms of their current cap space. These are numbers from over the cap, as I've been telling you guys I would be using. And I think the Rams are going to be able to do some things with it, and I trust their drafting acumen because they've been tremendous at drafting talent, especially in later rounds like Nakua and Kyren Williams, and I think the Rams are going to be good. I think the Rams are going to be good to go with their drafting ability. I trust their skill there. I trust their ability to find some talent. Speaking of the draft, the Rams have their own pick at 26 because obviously they made the divisional round and were, in truth, one play away from beating the Eagles had they been able to hold on to the football, of course. They were a play or two away from beating the Eagles, which was impressive on their part. They just couldn't stop Jalen Carter. Not many teams could down the stretch. They have the 26th pick, and then they don't pick again until 90. So that there's a little bit of issue there, but they have 2 picks in 10 from there. So you have 90 and then 100. Then they go to round 4. That's a round 3 pick, by the way. They have their own pick in round 4. They don't have a round 5 pick, but they have 2 round 6s. One of them is Atlanta's. And then they have a third one from Houston, and they don't have a round 7th pick. So that's where LA is, at least the Rams side of it. I do trust their ability to draft, though. Even without the allotment of picks that you'd like to see, I do think that they're going to be able to draft their way out of this. So that's the NFC West. And there's some good stories here. Where do the Niners go after trading Deebo Samuel to the Commanders? Where do they go with Purdy? Where do the Rams go when it comes to Stafford after agreeing to a deal? Will they draft his QB successor? Where do Seattle go for QB1? And Cardinals-wise, how does Arizona fill out the rest of that roster with the depth and all the money that they have to spend? There are a lot of questions to be answered here. Coming up next, we're going to talk about the Hard Knocks division. The Browns, the Bengals, the Steelers, and the Ravens. That is the AFC North. And it's going to go in that order. Cleveland, you will be the first stop of my next train of thought.